As a small business owner, you deserve more. More confidence, more connectivity, more of the tools that help your business thrive. And at Cox Business, you can expect more from us. We don't just have sales reps. We have perfect plan identifiers. People who will work with you to make sure your business gets everything it needs and nothing that it doesn't. Your business deserves more, and that's why you can expect more from Cox Business. Call 800-526-8572 to switch today.
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
All right, yeah, our roster looks great on paper. Whoop-de hell. All right. But at the end of the day, we better be a good team. And you start building that during this time of the year.
Get your sorry ass up! Get your sorry ass up!
Doing a lot of talking with somebody that ain't do shit today. Doing a lot of talking.
Do you think you're better than Jarrell Revis is right now?
I'm better than you. My 24 years of life, I'm better at life than you.
Dave! Time to go to work!
I ain't 36. I ain't never seen you before, huh? Better go tell the coach you need some help. We gonna expose you, boy. All right, we coming at your ass.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Roundtable.
Let's go! Let's go!
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast, proud members of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. You can find them at FTFPodNet on Twitter. You can find me at SportsFanaticMB on Twitter. And you can find my co-host for the day, Mr. Matthew Fox, at Nighthawk7734 on Twitter. We are just one of a ton of podcasts associated with this network, some of which are Jim Day of FF Champs, Corey Parsons, and Dr. Roto from Sirius XM Radio, Bob Lung of the award-winning Fantasy Football Consistency Guide, Dwayne McFarland, Blake Sullivan, and a ton of great others. You can find all of us on FullTimeFantasy.com, your one-stop shop for all of your fantasy news, advice, and strategies. We are also excited to be partnering with ExpandTheBoxScore.com. You can find them at XTBoxScore on Twitter. They have some of the best stats in the industry: baseball, NFL, basketball, and college football. College football stats, the hardest to find in the industry right now. Just not a lot of people pay attention to them, and they do. They have some of the best. If you follow me on Twitter and you see any of the stuff that I post about college football prospects and or teams, players, everything, it all comes from their website. The best stats, I'm telling you, college football-wise. And you can get their membership for just $15 a year. I'm telling you, that's one of the best deals in the industry. And if you use our code Roundtable, you will get 10% off of that. If you want to dive deep into the stat side of the industry, that is the way to go. Telling you, you will not be disappointed at all. They are constantly reinventing their website. Player profiles looking even better and crisper now than they were in the past. Great website, user-friendly, and again, some of the best stats. Use our code Roundtable, you'll get 10% off, $15. I'm telling you, best deal in the industry. With that being said, Matt is with me. He will be jumping on here in just a second. We're going to break down a ton of the games from Sunday and the Thursday Night Football podcast as well, since we were not able to do a Friday podcast, me and Dennis. So let's jump Matt in here. Let's break down a bunch of those games and talk about Week 12. And as always on Mondays, we've got Mr. Matthew Fox with us. Matt, how was your weekend? How did everything turn out for you and for your fantasy teams?
Well, much like me waiting for the Denver Broncos to actually show up for Week 12, I'm still waiting for my fantasy teams to show up. Amari Cooper, all the talent in the world, really appreciated that 0.
Yeah, I mean, I posted something, or I retweeted something on Twitter about that yesterday with Amari Cooper on the wide receivers that Stephon Gilmore has gone up against this year and just how bad it is. I'm trying to pull it up on my phone. So Juju and I guess really John Brown. Juju 6 for 78, John Brown 5 for 69, and then Preston Williams of all players on the Dolphins before he got hurt, obviously 63 for 4 catches, but then Odell 52 for 5, McLaurin 51 yards on 3 catches, Marquise Brown 48 yards on 3 catches, Jordan Matthews 6 yards on 1 catch, and then Amari Cooper with the shutout. was just, amazing. But in fairness to that, we have talked about that multiple times leading up to these past couple weeks that Cooper was definitely going to have some rougher matchups last week, this week, and even next week too, or this Thursday actually. In just a couple days, he goes up against the Buffalo Bills and likely Tre'Davious White, who has been a lockdown corner most of the year as well. So it's likely not going to be much better for Cooper owners. But I feel you on the fantasy side. This has just not been my year. I think, many of you know, and I'm in 38 leagues. As of today, I'm eliminated in like 20 of them. So, there's a couple of them that even though I have a chance, I think it's 6 of them I have a chance in. It's a very slim chance that I make the playoffs. So it has not been a fun year for me either. I cannot begin to explain how frustrating this whole season has been. It's probably my fault too, because I tend to buy into a lot of the same players. On a lot of these teams, I have a few of the same main characters here, main players, and they've really kind of let me down. Which just sucks, but it is what it is. I guess that's the fun part of looking toward next year. If there is a fun part in doing that, is I'm already getting to start that pretty early this season.
Yeah, it can't be any worse, right?
Yeah, that is true. I guess that's the best way to look at it. Let's see. So we did not do a Friday podcast due to some scheduling conflicts with me and Dennis and my kids being sick, which has kind of led to just another part of my wonderful weekend. So we will recap the Thursday night game on here as well, and then me and Matt will jump in. We're going to do all of the early games. There was a huge slate of early games on Sunday. We're going to recap all of those, save the 2 afternoon games and the night game and Monday Night Football game for tomorrow's podcast. So let's jump in and break down all of the early games and Thursday night game from Week 11.
Prepare for glory!
I don't know if you got your popcorn ready. If you got your popcorn ready.
I came out the womb, I was ready.
And he's hit the end zone for an unbelievable touchdown.
I would be honored if you played football for this team.
Throw it up above his head. They can't jump with me. Golly.
Oh, they tackle him at the 40-yard line. Who can make a play? I can. Who can make a play? I can.
So we will start off with that Thursday night game, which really wasn't as good of a game as I had hoped it would be. Obviously, we talked a little bit about it on the Thursday podcast with Tony and what he hoped the Colts would be able to pull off a win. They were not. Still a close game, but they lose 17-20 in this one. Jacoby Brissett goes 16-25, 125 yards, does get a rushing touchdown with 20 yards as well. Jonathan Williams does come through for you big time, 104 yards, 1 touchdown on 26 carries. Does get you 17 yards in the receiving game. Brissett comes in at QB 16 with 13.2 points. Williams RB5 with 19.6 points. Hines RB26 with 7.1 points. 51 yards on 9 carries, does add 10 yards on 2 catches. And then T.Y. Hilton plays a little bit, but not much in this one. Comes in at wide receiver 61 with 3.3 points. Hilton was on somewhat of a snap count, pitch count, whatever you want to call it, in that game. So did come out, give a little bit, but he was advised by his doctors to not play the entire game, and he didn't. Eric Ebron comes in at tight end 9 with 6.4 points, 44 yards on 4 catches. Jack Doyle, 28 yards on 3 catches. We did see that Ebron got hurt, and he is done for the year. It came out earlier today that he is getting put on IR. So is Jack Doyle a tight end worth starting now moving forward, knowing he is going to get the full workload here at the tight end position?
I mean, I think as much as several of the guys at that position, it's been a tough position. I more have questions about the Colts passing game in general, which we've seen for a couple weeks now has been a struggle. Obviously Eric Ebron said surgery on both ankles, so that sounds unpleasant. Doyle has been a good tight end for the Colts in the past. Only 4 targets in this game. Ebron really only 5 targets. They don't have a ton of great receivers. Besides Hilton, who's obviously still struggling with his own injuries. But I have some concerns about their passing game in general. This is a few games in a row now where they haven't done much in the way of passing. They're really relying on the run. And I know one of the people post-game for Fox was talking about the fact that it was kind of curious to them that, Houston has a better rush defense than a pass defense, and yet in the core parts of the game, they were continuing to try to pound it on the ground, unable to really get anything going in the passing game. And that's going to be something of a concern as they finish out this schedule and go try to make a run at the postseason. The Titans are not going away, and I believe those two teams play next week. That could be a real swinger of a game, especially having lost to the Texans. Now the Texans take that lead in the AFC South, so kind of a precarious position for the Colts. Doyle's a guy, a lot of people have been starting him anyway. I don't think that his odds get any worse. I don't know how much better they get.
Yeah, so the Colts do get the Titans this week, while the Texans get the Patriots, and then they play the Titans twice, leading out the rest of the season. In 2 more weeks, they get their first matchup, and then in Week 17 as well. So that could, obviously for fantasy, that Week 17 matchup isn't going to matter much, but that could be a big matchup, not just for the Texans, but for the Titans as well, in what has become a really tight race here in the AFC wildcard spot, at least that second spot. As even though Buffalo is only 3 games up with us getting as late as we are into the season, I feel like they're pretty secure in keeping that top spot for the wild card there in the AFC. On the Texans side, Deshaun Watson, 19 of 30, 298 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Does get 10 yards on the ground. To come in at QB 10 with 19.9 points. Carlos Hyde, RB 29 with 6.7 points, just 67 yards on 16 rushes. Duke Johnson, 22 yards on 5 carries, does add 8 yards on 1 catch. DeAndre Hopkins has a huge game here, though. 94 yards, 2 touchdowns on 6 catches. To come in at wide receiver 4 with 24.4 points. Will Fuller in his first game back. Healthy, comes in as a top 10 wide receiver 10 with 17.5 points, 140 yards on 7 catches. So I've kind of been on the train that when Fuller is out, Hopkins tends to have his best games, mostly because the field is just funneled through him because he is by far their best receiver. Will Fuller comes out, and why not by a lot? He out-targets Hopkins here 11-8. I think for me, once Will Fuller is out on the field, if we know he's going to be out there, regardless of the injury history, you have to play him because he is just so dynamic, and we have seen that him and Watson have this great connection. So knowing that we're about to jump into Week 13, this is it. If you have not secured a playoff spot and you need a win this week, it's nut-cutting time. You have to play your best lineup. Is there anybody on this team outside of the big 3 guys, Watson, Hopkins, and Fuller, that you are willing to throw in your lineup, knowing they're going up against the New England Patriots?
No, and I think you're even moderating your expectations on Hopkins, who is going to draw Stephon Gilmore. Hopkins, obviously an incredible receiver. You're not sitting him, but
right.
We've seen good receivers struggle. Could be a better day for Will Fuller. And I think, we talked about this before. Duke Johnson seemed to pick up there for a while. It seemed like when Fuller goes out, Duke Johnson assumes some of that receiving role. You see Fuller come back and Johnson immediately becomes unusable again. He doesn't do enough rushing wise. You can't count on either of these running backs getting a goal line touchdown because Watson also, we've seen, is a quarterback that's not afraid to put it in himself. So Hyde is a really desperate flex because of volume, but Johnson, I think, becomes unplayable.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And Hyde, as you just said, is an extremely desperate flex as well. There's just no way I could trust him, especially this week. Maybe in the playoffs, they have a couple, or I think it's just really one more nice matchup. Outside of that, Hopkins, as you said, you have to start him just because you draft him as your wide receiver 1. You have to limit expectations this week. But outside of those 3, I'm with you. I do not feel comfortable starting anybody. Next up, we got the New York Giants and the Chicago Bears. The Giants losing this one 14-19. Daniel Jones goes 21 of 36, 151 yards and 2 touchdowns. To come in at QB 12 with 16.7 points. Saquon Barkley has a rough day in this one. RB 27 with just 7 points. 59 yards on 17 carries, just 1 yard on 2 catches. Just a really bad day for Barkley, who's had a really weird year as well. Golden Tate comes in at wide receiver 23 with 10.8 points, 33 yards and a touchdown on 3 catches. Darius Slayton, 67 yards on 4 catches to come in at wide receiver 30 with 8.7 points. We saw Sterling Shepard return back to the lineup. He gets you 15 yards on 5 catches to come in at wide receiver 42 with 6.2 points. I really don't feel like you're starting, at least for me, anybody on this team outside of maybe Tate as a low-end flex option. I need to see more out of Shepard, this being his first game back, especially with this, again, we talked about going into week 13 now. You need to play your best players. With that being said, do you disagree with that? And are you worried at Barkley? Because as someone who, or worried about Barkley, as someone who owns him, he has just not looked the same this year. I'm hoping it's just the ankle issue, but outside of a couple games at the beginning of the season, he has not looked like the Saquon Barkley we fell in love with last year.
Yeah, and their line is not very good, which is certainly part of the problem, but he has not been reliable. Now you're coming into week 13, a crucial week. They're home, but they're facing the Packers, not a great matchup. And then next week, which is the first week of the playoffs for most, they're facing the Eagles, which, Seattle managed to find some running room with Rashad Penny yesterday, but most people have not been able to run against the Eagles. So I think that's a real grim sign. Even in what should have been decent matchups, we haven't seen a ton from Barkley. He just doesn't look like he's got quite the same pop. He brushed off this last week any implication that he was not healthy and that they should shut him down for the season. Something doesn't look right.
Yeah, I think, in all honesty, too, some of it is, I think, a lot of those wide receivers. Last year, we saw really most of his production came from what we're seeing out of Christian McCaffrey this year in Carolina with Kyle Allen and all the dump-off passes that he's getting. He's just not getting that this year. A lot of those stuff is going to Tate Shepard just now coming back, but Tate or Slayton. Daniel Jones is taking more shots down the field than we saw out of Eli. So that may be some of it as well. Add in, as you just talked about, the really bad line. He's not getting you that rushing production, and when you lose that receiving production that he had last year, he is unfortunately just not quite the same player we saw last year. Hopefully that'll change for him. I do think the ankle issue does have something to do with it, but it's obviously not fun times looking forward if you are a Saquon Barkley owner. Speaking of not fun times, if you're any player, you own any of the players on the Bears outside of Allen Robinson, you are not having a fun season as well. Mitch Trubisky does have a good game in this one, comes in at QB8 with 20.9 points in this one. 25 of 41, 278, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, does add a rushing touchdown as well. Tariq Cohen is the running back of note here, 25 yards on 6 carries and adds 29 yards, on 7 catches. To come in at RB20 with 8.9 points. Allen Robinson, though, continues to be the best player on the team. Wide receiver 5 with 22.1 points. 6 catches, 131 yards, and 1 touchdown. Anthony Miller, 77 yards and 6 catches to come in at wide receiver 24 with 10.7 points. And David Montgomery, just 22 yards on 13 carries, 2 catches for 9 yards. So he has clearly moved his way out of your lineups if you had him. I'm someone who's owned him in a lot of leagues. He has firmly found a spot on the bench for me. I think really outside of Allen Robinson, there is no one on this team that you can play. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, that's probably true. They have a big Thanksgiving Day game against the Lions. The Lions have not been very good against the rush or the pass, but usually they get somewhat of a bump at home on Thanksgiving Day. Both those teams kind of out of the playoff hunt. Yeah. Allen Robinson's probably the only one you're feeling good about, but if David Montgomery was going to pick it up, that would probably be a more opportune matchup.
Yeah, the Lions are one of the worst teams against the run right now, so this could be a possible David Montgomery bounce-back game, but man, I think you've got to have a lot of balls to play him after what you've seen out of the past couple weeks. So if you do and he goes off, much power to you. For me, he's firmly planted on my bench for the rest of this season, which I'm also going to say I saw a lot of people pointing out on Twitter that he might be one of the biggest recent rookie busts, and I feel like a lot of people have forgotten how bad Rashad Penny was the past couple years, who was a first-round pick, and Ronald Jones, who was a much higher second-round pick. I really think if you look at the Eagles and see the success that Jordan Howard is having, I hate to say this because I do think Matt Nagy is a good coach. I would say that the reason Jordan Howard is struggling, or not Jordan Howard, I'm sorry, David Montgomery is struggling is more due to Matt Nagy and the coaching decisions going on there than necessarily the talent because, like I said, Jordan Howard looked like he was one of the worst running backs in the league last year with the Bears, and he has definitely turned it around with this Philadelphia team, which are using multiple backs.
All of Chicago has regressed incredibly.
That is true, yeah.
Mitch Trubisky's looked lost. Tariq Cohen looks like nobody knows how to use him. None of their receivers. Gabriel occasionally does things. Anthony Miller, him catching 6 for 77, most people have left him for dead. I mean, there's something wrong fundamentally with Chicago's game plan, and it's impacting all of those guys.
Yeah, I think the only player, and I think we've actually talked about this before, is Allen Robinson and how bad you have, at least for me personally, and I'm pretty sure you were the one who brought it up, how bad you feel for him because of how good he has looked with a quarterback that has not been that good. And then he had Blake Bortles before that. Imagine how good Allen Robinson could be if he had a competent quarterback back there. It's ridiculous the numbers that he is putting up with having what Mitch Trubisky has done this year at QB because it has not been great. Speaking of QBs here, Ryan Fitzpatrick and Baker Mayfield kind of start dueling each other a little bit in a game that ended up... It was not as bad, I think, as the final score indicates in 41-24. The Dolphins, while necessarily weren't in it for the most part in the first half, did actually have a pretty good second half here. Ryan Fitzpatrick bouncing back pretty nicely after 2 picks. Does get 2 touchdowns, 214 yards, 21-39. Has a fairly decent day here. Doubt you're starting him, but does come in at QB4 with 25.1 points. Kalen Ballage leads the running backs here. 13 yards on 7 carries. Doesn't really do anything in the receiving game. Just 1 catch for 13 yards. Comes in at running back 45 with 3.1 points. Allen Hurns and DeVante Parker come in at the wide receiver position, though both finishing at wide receiver 2s. Parker 91 yards on 6 catches. Allen Hurns 42 yards on 4 catches and a touchdown. Hurns wide receiver 17 with 12.2 points. Parker wide receiver 18 with 12.1 points. And then Mike Gesicki at tight end has a decent day here, which was good because it looked like he might be knocked out early in that game with an injury. Kind of had a Browns player fall back on him. Looked like he hurt his knee. Comes in at tight end 4 with 10.3 points. 28 yards, 3 catches, 1 touchdown. For the Dolphins, I mean, I really don't think you can start anyone on this team outside of DeVante Parker. I'll give it to John Hamler, a guy who writes for the FLA blog. We had him on with us earlier in the offseason. He was hyping up the Parker train, had that thing running and gunning down the tracks, and he has really made him look good this year with what Parker has done. I think he's firmly moved into that flex spot, possibly wide receiver 2 or 3, depending on your team construction. But what about Gesicki? I feel like he might fall in that category with Doyle that we were just talking about at tight end. Would you feel comfortable plugging him in at tight end every week? Because he seems to be getting a lot of targets, and as bad as the tight end landscape is, might be someone worthy of throwing in.
I don't know if I'm as confident in him. I'd rather have Doyle of the 2 you talked about there. I think we've seen a better track record. It's really hard to tell what the Dolphins are going to do. They do have, in terms of passing matchups, a decent matchup. In week 13, they're playing the Eagles. You're not playing any of their running backs anyway, so pass that weapons. I still think Allen Hurns is somebody that you might want to stash. They obviously just gave him a contract extension. It seems like he's become more of a focal point of late, getting quite a few targets, and he's turning them into something. I don't know if it's a guy you're going to want to play this year, but especially if you're in a dynasty league, maybe somebody to hang on to, because we don't know what's going to happen with Parker.
Yeah.
He's on the last year of his rookie deal. Has he played well enough that they're going to decide to invest in him? Miami obviously has money, and they're going to have draft picks. Allen Hurns, they've already obviously seen enough that they want to keep him, which is interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think out of the way that the seasons have been going, now Allen Hurns, I guess you could say, has had a more productive career so far than what DeVante Parker has done. Really, this has been the only year Parker has been productive, but I would think that they would invest in him, but we'll see. It's a completely new regime there when it comes to the front office and coaches and everything from the team that drafted DeVante Parker. So whether he stays with them or not, I feel like he's earned a decent paycheck somewhere. I think he'll get paid as a probably middle to low tier wide receiver 2 in the NFL. We'll see if he goes to a different team. The Cleveland Browns win their 3rd game in a row, and we finally saw the offense we've been hoping, I think, to have seen the whole season. They really put together a really good game here. Baker 24-34, 327 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Comes in at QB5 with 24.6 points. Nick Chubb, running back 4 with 23.9 points, 106 yards, 1 touchdown on 21 carries. Kareem Hunt gets a touchdown as well on 8 carries and 37 yards. Does add 9 yards on 2 catches. Chubb adds 58 yards on 3 catches. Hunt, RB17 with 10.6 points. Jarvis Landry continues to be the best wide receiver on the team. Comes in at wide receiver 2 this week with 31.8 points, 148 yards, 2 touchdowns on 10 catches. And then Odell Beckham Jr. gets into the end zone again for the first time since week 2. 1 touchdown, 84 yards on 6 catches. Coming in at wide receiver 11 with 17.4 points. So Odell's first week since week 2 as a top 12 wide receiver option for fantasy. But I think it's really moved to Jarvis Landry being the one for fantasy reasons on this offense. And I think a lot of that comes from something we've talked about before. And Odell is getting by far the better matchups. And Baker, it seems like, has decided he's not going to force him the ball anymore. And he is going to look to Landry. Landry played with them last year. They have a little bit of a connection. You can definitely see it if you watch the games, as I do every Sunday. When Baker starts moving around out of the pocket, Odell doesn't necessarily seem to break off his route and come back to Baker like Jarvis does every time. I think some of that is just the chemistry of them playing all season last year and now obviously having this one as well. So I don't mean this in a way that Landry is better than Odell, but with the recent performances we've seen really for the past 5-6 weeks now of Landry, as he moved as the better fantasy option for the Browns over Odell for this season.
I think so, probably for a lot of the reasons you talked about. That Baker and Odell are starting to build a little more chemistry. A lot was made of the fact they didn't play that, they didn't work that much together in the off season. They didn't play that much together in the preseason. So it's been a lot of figuring each other out. That combined with a pretty hideous schedule at the beginning, I think set them behind. I think you'll see that probably continue to grow down the stretch, but he already has that with Landry. He and Landry had something going a lot at the end of last year and have been able to carry that over. And Landry's not drawing the same kind of coverage Beckham is. And with a running game that's as robust as what they have, they can't just sit back there on all the passing weapons. So somebody's going to have an opportunity, and so far that seems to be Landry. I would say, though, I think they have 5 people that you're considering playing and starting on a weekly basis. I would put Mayfield back up there because of the schedule and because he seems to have balanced out. Chubb, Hunt have both looked usable. Landry and Beckham have both looked usable. I'm still a little nervous about week 13, not because I think the Steelers are great, but because who knows what kind of physicality and tone that game is going to have after what we saw 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, as a Browns fan, I'm worried about that as well. Obviously, everybody is talking about that. I was listening to some stuff on the radio this morning, and that's what they were talking about. They were going over all the games, and they were like, you know what, we don't even need to go over the Browns-Dolphins game because all that matters is the game next week when they go back and play the Steelers after everything that happened last Thursday. So everybody is moving and focusing in on this game, and we know Baker, Odell, even Landry, really, they can all be very emotional players, so it'll be interesting to see if they can keep those in check and how that works moving forward. Definitely going to be an interesting game. We should get Njoku back as well. Well, I don't think he'll be an integral part of the offense in this first game back. He might take some targets away from those guys.
Well, and it's in Pittsburgh, so you can imagine the atmosphere is going to be a little rough, and Pittsburgh, the strength of their team is definitely their defense. I think it'll be very interesting. It looks like they're tracking toward Mason Rudolph not being the quarterback out there. What will that do? Will Pittsburgh get some of their pieces back? It's going to be an interesting game, and I still like those Browns players, and they have an incredible second half schedule, which we've talked about. So those are going to be great assets for you if you've made the playoffs and are going forward. I might have a little bit of hesitation for this week.
Yeah, I know. I'm with you on that. In all honesty, I think it was Sheldon Richardson's comments. I'm with him on the fact that he wants Mason Rudolph out there at quarterback because of the way he played against the Browns on Thursday a week ago, and I'm with him on that. I think Duck Hodges probably gives them a better chance to win, so I'd much rather see Mason Rudolph out there, if I'm being honest. Next up, we've got a game that was really good, and I feel like Carolina unfortunately got the short end of the stick here due to their kicking situation. Joey Slime missing 2 extra points and then a field goal at the end of the game that probably would have sent this to overtime. Maybe Drew Brees drives them down and scores a touchdown, but I think with the way the game was going, they likely kicked that field goal like they did, and it goes into overtime 34-34. But the Panthers lose 31-34. Kyle Allen has a bounce-back game in this one. 23-36, 256, 3 touchdowns in this one. Does get 9 yards rushing. QB7 with 23.1 points. CMC just continues to dominate. RB2 with 29.8 points in this one, 64 yards on 22 carries and a touchdown, 69 yards on 9 catches and a touchdown in the receiving game. DJ Moore continues to assert himself as a top wide receiver in the league. Comes in at wide receiver 3 this week with 28.4 points, 126 yards, 2 touchdowns on 6 catches. Curtis Samuel just 9 yards on 1 catch. Wide receiver 44 with 5.4 points. Did get a pass interference call in the end zone for a touchdown. They were targeting him in the end zone a little bit. 2 of his 4 targets came in the end zone, just did not get a touchdown. And then when Greg Olsen popped up back on the score sheet here, 5 catches, 44 yards, comes in at tight end 8 with 6.9 points. Moving forward for me, I feel like this is the kind of route we're going to take the next couple weeks as we're getting in. Obviously, we've talked about the playoffs, week 13. It's time to play the players that you think can help you win. And for me on the Panthers side, it's just Moore and CMC. As much as I love Curtis Samuel, we just haven't seen enough out of Allen. I think he's at best a dart throw. So for you, would you play anyone outside of Moore and CMC?
No, I think that's totally right. There was an interesting super highlight reel on Twitter this week that basically the theme of it was poor Curtis Samuel, showing all the times that he was wide open and Kyle Allen couldn't get it to him. And I think that explains a lot. A lot of people believed in Samuel's talent, thought that he could end up having the better season. I think the change in passer and the fact that Cam Newton was never what we thought Cam Newton might be has really changed that narrative. Moore seems to be a guy that Allen's more easily able to find. And of course, he seems to really do well checking it down, which is why we've seen McCaffrey and at times Greg Olsen. But I think you're in a spot in the season, McCaffrey possibly RB1 every week, more a decent play, nothing else you're going to risk.
Yeah, before we move on to the Saints side here, Christian McCaffrey, the no doubt 1-1 next year in redraft leagues?
Definitely. I think so. Although, you would like to see what Carolina's going to do in the offseason, but I think Christian McCaffrey will definitely be the consensus number 1 pick. That hasn't always worked out very well. You know, Barkley was the consensus number 1 for doing a lot of the same things that we've seen McCaffrey do on a team that's struggling, and it hasn't translated into year-over-year success. But, I think people are going to remember what he's done. The real shame for him is I think he really should be the NFL MVP because he's been carrying this team, but the way the Panthers have faded away, I think this loss really knocked them out of the playoff discussion because the way the NFC is set up, it looks like the wild card in the NFC is going to have at least 10 wins. I just don't see them going 5-1 or 5-1 down the stretch here. So actually it'd be 5-0. I don't see them going 5-0 down the stretch. So I think they really kind of got knocked out of the playoffs. And I think unfortunately that's going to take an impact on McCaffrey, who has been superhuman at times.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like, obviously with everything we've seen out of Lamar Jackson, who is having a phenomenal season, he's kind of become the MVP front runner. I'm with you. After everything I've seen out of Christian McCaffrey, I feel like it has to go to him, not just because the Panthers are fading, but I feel like if you're a defensive coordinator, your whole goal is to go in and stop Christian McCaffrey because he is the only player that scares you on that offense. And yet nobody has been able to do it. There have been games where he has struggled on the ground or struggled in the air, but then he's come through for you in the other one. I think there's one game, I think it was the Bucks in week 2 or 3 was the only game that I can remember off the top of my head that Christian McCaffrey had a bad game. Outside of that, he's been lights out every single week. So I'm with you. For me, he is my MVP, but chances are with the Panthers fading off here, he is not going to win it. Another guy I think should be in the MVP discussion just based on what he's doing this year is the wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints and Michael Thomas. He's just continuing to ball out. 10 catches, 101 yards, and 1 touchdown, continuing that record watch here of most receptions in a year. He comes in at wide receiver 7 with 21.1 points. Drew Brees comes in at QB 6 with 23.4 points, 30 of 39, 311, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Latavius Murray gets you a touchdown and 64 yards on 7 carries if you, for whatever reason, were playing him. He comes in at RB12 with 12.4 points. Alvin Kamara, RB7 with 14.7 points. So Kamara continues to be scoreless here recently. 11 carries, 54 yards, does add 48 yards on 9 catches. Again, to come in at RB7 with 14.7 points. And Jared Cook continues to pop up here in the tight end points here. Tight end 3, 18.9 points in this one. 99 yards, 6 catches, and 1 touchdown. I mean, Kamara, I don't feel like there's anything you can do at this point. He has to be in your lineup. Obviously, he has still kind of produced for you, but is just lacking those touchdowns to really kind of make your week for you in fantasy. We know you're starting Thomas, but what about Jared Cook? Again, we'll get continuing on this trend of, do you trust them moving forward? He's had a couple good games now. Are you trusting putting him in that, tight end, or in your lineup at tight end? Is he above that Doyle group, or does he fall into that Doyle group for you?
I think I'd put him above Doyle because, in that range, because it seems like he has a better chance of getting a touchdown because he's in a little bit of a better, more high-scoring offense. He certainly seems to have kind of come up there as the second best receiver that's not a running back. Obviously Kamara and Thomas seem to be the top 2 options. I think we saw Murray get a little more run early today because Kamara is still dealing with some nagging injuries, and I think that's been a little bit of the problem holding him back this year. We've even seen him miss a couple of games. But I think you're starting Kamara and Thomas, and Cook really probably depends on your options and the matchup.
Yeah, I agree with you. For me, he's moved ahead of that tier as well. I would probably put him in the tier right behind, the Kittles, Ertz, man, why do I always forget one of these 3? I remember 2 of them, and I can't remember. Kelsey. I feel like Hooper's hurt, but I feel like Hooper would definitely be right there with those guys now. And then Jared Cook, I think, falls in that second tier there. So, Michael Thomas just needs 39 more catches to tie Marvin Harrison's record, 40 to beat it. We are obviously going into week 13, so roughly 4 weeks left because I believe they've already had their bye, right? So they've got 4 more games. That'll be 10 catches a game. It's going to be tight. He's been getting about 10 catches every single game here recently. Got 11 targets.
5 games left to do
5
it.
Games, so gotcha. So just under about 8-ish.
Yeah, a little bit over 8. It's still probably... 8.
Yeah.
It's probably... It could be tight, but he could also get like 15 against the Falcons on...
That's true.
On Thanksgiving.
Well, I feel like... What we've seen lately, I wouldn't even say lately, you probably have seen it throughout the year or throughout the history of the NFL. I feel like if he's close to it come those last few weeks, I would not be surprised. Not that they don't force him the ball anyways, because they do. He is by far the best wide receiver in the league right now. But I would not be surprised if they don't start forcing him the ball in the last couple weeks of the season if he's getting close to the record, just to get him the record. Because he deserves it. He was on pace to break it last year, and like I said, had a huge fall off this year. With him doing it with Brees, then obviously with a Teddy Bridgewater as well for most of the season, has just been remarkable. Marvin Harrison had one of the best of all time, and Peyton Manning throwing him the ball all season long. So I'm looking forward to it. I do hope he gets it again because I love Michael Thomas. I'm a big fan of his, and I've firmly put him as the wide receiver 1 moving forward here for us for the next couple of years because he just looks like he his Twitter handle alone says it all, can't guard Mike, and he does seem unguardable almost every single week that he is out there.
Well, and with the way the NFC is going, it doesn't look like the Saints are going to face any challenge for their division.
Yeah.
They pretty well got that locked up. But, the 49ers, the Seahawks, the Packers still have pretty solid records. There's going to be a huge push and a fight, to the very end to get one of those 2 bye week slots. And I think the Saints definitely want to try to get home field. So if you're a fantasy owner, you have to feel encouraged. The best cream of the crop of the NFC is probably all going to have to play their best players throughout the end of the regular season, which means you probably won't have to worry about missing some guys in crucial moments.
Yeah, I think obviously the 49ers putting that whooping on Green Bay last night really helped actually with that, because Green Bay kind of then took a step back and really opens up that second spot. The 49ers are kind of sitting pretty comfortable there. The Seattle Saints, Green Bay, even the Vikings are now all kind of moving into that picture. But they all have a chance to get that. So I'm with you. They all are probably going to be playing that out now the rest of the season to try and get that second spot, where if Green Bay had won last night, I feel like it probably would be most people looking up at Green Bay and San Francisco. You mentioned the Falcons and how Michael Thomas gets to play them and their bad secondary. Well, we saw Chris Godwin kind of take advantage of that bad secondary yesterday, and the Buccaneers coming away with a victory 35-23. Jameis Winston goes, let's see here, as QB3 on the week with 26.3 points, goes 18-28, 313 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Ronald Jones has a little bit of a bounce-back game here. RB9 with 14.2 points, 51 yards, 12 carries, 1 touchdown. Does get you 16 yards on 3 catches in the receiving game. Probably felt good for him, I would imagine, sticking that to Dirk Cutter a little bit, who is the offensive coordinator on Atlanta, was the head coach for Tampa Bay last year that kind of gave up on him. As I mentioned, Chris Godwin had himself a day. Wide receiver 1 with 33.9 points, 184 yards, 2 touchdowns on 7 catches, which usually means that Mike Evans has a bad day, and he did here. Just 50 yards on 4 catches. Wide receiver 38 with 7 points in this one. It's kind of what you expect, unfortunately, if you own Evans and or Godwin. Sometimes both these guys can have good weeks, but more than likely you're going to see one have a really good week, one have a bad week. You're still playing them every single week. But what about Ronald Jones? He's kind of struggled the past 2 weeks. Has he moved himself back into possible flex territory for you with them moving forward?
I think it really depends on what your other options are, because, of course, Week 13 is going to feature all 32 teams back in action. All the bye weeks are over. And like we said, most cases it's a must-win either to get into the playoffs or really to secure seeding. So it really depends on what your options are. Outside of, even Godwin and Evans, there's a little bit of trepidation about how they're going to finish. But this entire Tampa Bay offense is really hard to read, going back and forth. Ronald Jones, how differently do we look at his day if he doesn't get into the end zone rushing? 51 yards rushing. He had 12 carries. Barber had 11 carries. So there's not, even though he's the quote-unquote starter now and is getting the quote-unquote most carries, what does most carries mean? The last couple of weeks, that hasn't meant a ton. He maximized his efforts. It was a good matchup for him this week, because the Falcons, of course, after 2 great games, I started to moderately believe in them and stream their defense. So I knew I was setting myself up to be crushed. But, three catches for 16 yards. Their entire passing game outside of those 2 receivers is real hit or miss. I mean, last week we saw Cameron Brate get like 14 targets and catch 10 passes. He got a single target and no catches yesterday, and O.J. Howard gets 2 targets and catches a pass.
Yeah.
You can't really feel confident in that. So, if your running back situation's pretty dire, Ronald Jones is allegedly the starter and getting the most touches in that Tampa Bay backfield. What does that mean and what does it produce? That's a whole other question.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that as someone who's a huge Ronald Jones fan. The one thing, or the way I would probably put it is, I'm playing the matchups with him in flex position, and I agree with you. With all the buys done now, you know what your roster looks like, so you're playing him against your other flex options, going best matchup. He does have 3 good matchups here coming up. Obviously, the Jaguars have been run on a lot, so that's not a great matchup, but it's a decent one. Colts is a bad matchup. I would not play him then. But then the Lions and Texans, both teams that, as of late, have been in the bottom 5 against the run. So I would feel fairly good playing him in those games if you did not have any better options in the flex spot. Obviously, they get the Falcons as well, but most people don't play in Week 17 championship. So, again, 3 out of 4 weeks, I would feel decent playing him, but that all depends on your roster construction and your other matchups moving forward. He is not a lock set flex option, but he does have a couple good matchups. I would feel good playing him, again, depending on the players you have. And
the real problem, too, for the Buccaneers, while they may be able to play pretty even with somebody like the Jaguars, and we know the Colts have played even, the real problem for running game for Tampa Bay is if they get behind, they have to throw a lot, and they sort of abandon the run, which wasn't a superb running game anyway. I think that's like what happened to them the week before. So, going to be some, against a secondary that can't cover facing DeAndre Hopkins and Will Fuller, that could get out of bounds pretty quick, and it won't matter what the Texans' rush defense is like.
Yeah, I agree. I think if anybody owns DeAndre Hopkins or Will Fuller, you're hoping you make it to the championship game because that is likely going to be a huge game for you. As someone who owns Hopkins in a couple places, that's what I'm looking forward to, is hoping if I can make it to that championship game, I'm at least going to have one really good matchup going for me. On the Falcons side here, Matt Ryan, 23 of 46, 271, no touchdowns and 1 interception to come in at QB 21 with 10.6 points. We saw Quadri Allison get a bulk of the carries here, one less than Brian Hill, but does more with them. 8 carries, 20 yards does get you a touchdown. Brian Hill gets you 9 carries, but just 14 yards in this one. Brian Hill, 13 yards on 2 catches. Allison, just 7 on 1. The Allison, though, is the one that comes in for fantasy, mostly again because of the touchdown. RB19 with 9.2 points. Calvin Ridley continues to benefit from Austin Hooper's absence here. 85 yards on 6 catches and 1 touchdown. Comes in at wide receiver 8 with 19 points. Russell Gage gets you some fantasy points as well. A couple people have been talking about playing him, so if you have, he came through for you. 76 yards on 8 catches. Julio, 5 catches for 68 yards. Gage, wide receiver 20 with 11.6 points. Julio, wide receiver 29 with 9.3 points. As I said, for some of what we saw out of Allison, he looked good against the Buccaneers. Again, the Buccaneers are the second best run defense in the league right now, which is surprising, I know, but as you just mentioned there, their secondary is just god-awful, and that's how teams beat them, but their run defense is very good. Allison looked decent there. Would you trust playing Allison moving forward over Hill if Freeman is not coming back next week? We still don't know for sure when Freeman is coming back. The first thought was that it would be 2 weeks, so many would assume he'd be back for this Week 13 matchup. If he is not, would you pick up Allison if you're a Freeman owner and play him?
So I think it's a bad matchup, and it's a short week. DeVante Freeman did take part in the walkthrough today for the Falcons because remember they play Thursday night against the Saints. I don't want any of the running backs. The Falcons have a lot of questions for a team going into that game because Julio got banged up yesterday, was a non-participant in practice today. Austin Hooper's still a non-participant in practice. It does look like Freeman is tracking to be able to play since he took part in practice today.
Gotcha.
But it's they're running. They have huge offensive line problems, which plagued Matt Ryan all year. Ryan got sacked 6 times yesterday. Probably part of the reason they lifted him because they were so far behind. I think that's taking an impact on the rushers. Obviously, Hill and Allison haven't done enough in terms of rushing yardage with carries on the ground to feel good about them. They aren't enough a piece of the passing game to feel good about them. What would leaven their performances if you fall into the end zone? Is that going to happen? Is that a great bet against the Saints? Who knows? The last time these two teams played a couple weeks ago, it was a very shocking outcome. Still wasn't a great rushing performance by anyone. So I wouldn't, in a crucial week like that, I wouldn't have much faith in either of them. Even DeVante Freeman playing, I would lower expectations quite a bit.
Yeah, we will definitely break down that game on tomorrow's podcast as we get ready for the Thursday games. Three, in my opinion, probably three craptastic games for Thanksgiving. Unfortunately, I'm not really excited about any of them. One of the teams that is playing on Thanksgiving this week is the Buffalo Bills, who beat Denver this week 3-20. Brandon Allen here, 10-25, 82 yards, 0 touchdowns, 1 interception to come in at QB 27 with 3.1 points. Phillip Lindsay, RB25 with 7.3 points, 57 yards on 13 carries, did add 1 catch for 11 yards. And Cortland Sutton, wide receiver 63 with 3.2 points, just 1 catch on 27 yards. Did get 8 targets though, so still by far the best wide receiver on the team. Just for whatever reason couldn't get it going. I did not get to see a lot of this game. So what happened with the Broncos? Are you still trusting Sutton and Lindsay moving forward? And there was news that came out today that Vic Fangio said Drew Lock might be on the roster and might be the starter coming this weekend. What do you feel about that, or how do you feel about that news?
Yeah, well, I mean, when you have a guy like Brandon Allen that rolls out a QBR of 6.0, I don't know how you go away from him. No, I'm just kidding. He was really poor. He looked terrible yesterday, and their entire offense looked terrible. So they're returning home to play the Chargers this week, and that is a team they actually beat in Los Angeles. So, probably as good a matchup as any. Lindsey's getting a bulk of the carries. I still wish he was more involved in the passing game. Fant, I thought, looked okay at times. Still got 5 targets. That seems to be involved. Sutton caught that one beautiful pass for 27 yards on the first drive, and then they just weren't able to get him the ball. It was a terrible Denver performance. Not knowing, if Allen plays, I don't know how great you feel about him after seeing the last 6 quarters of his work, because he really faded in the second half in Minnesota too. If Locke plays, it's a complete unknown, and it's a guy who did on IR all season. He's only had a couple weeks of practice since he came back. He, for most of the time he's been on IR up until their bye week, he wasn't even practicing.
Yeah.
So, we haven't seen him take a lot of reps. He wasn't taking first team reps, and they weren't playing their first team players at all in the preseason. So you don't really even get to see chemistry there. I like Sutton's talent. I still think he's a good player. I like Fant's talent. I like Lindsey's talent. This offense may hold them back. If you were relying on them yesterday, you got kind of a bummer of a performance. The Chargers defense doesn't scare you like the Bills defense does, but the quarterback situation is pretty brutal.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see Locke out there, just as something we've talked about for a couple podcasts now, and seeing what you have out of him, although the Chargers might not be the best game to throw him out there. While their defense is not that scary, that pass rush is, and I could see them kind of getting after Drew Lock quite a lot in that game. But I would love to see him out there, see what he's got. He might be able to help out Sutton and them a little bit, but I do think it's a bounce-back game for them regardless, whether it's Brandon Allen or Lock out there going up against that Chargers defense. On the Bills side here, Josh Allen goes 15-25, 185, 2 touchdowns, and an interception, gets 56 yards rushing to come in at QB9 with 20 points. Devin Singletary has his first 100 yards rushing as a running back in the NFL. Also comes in at RB14 with 11.9 points. 106 yards on 21 carries, get you 1 catch for 8 yards. Cole Beasley, wide receiver 14, 76 yards, a touchdown on 6 catches. John Brown gets a nice touchdown as well that was actually ruled on the field, I believe, as a touchdown, then overturned, and then ruled a touchdown again on a challenge. Gets 39 yards, touchdown, 2 catches, wide receiver 21 with 10.9 points in this one. And then Frank Gore, while he doesn't do much fantasy-wise for you, does get 65 yards, 15 carries, does move himself up the rushing list, now 3rd all-time in rushing yards, so congratulations to him. Just a consummate pro. Has been a legit player, and he had a really nice standing ovation from the Buffalo Bills fans as well, which I thought was nice of them, considering most of his career has been played as a Dolphin, but that was a huge milestone for him. Happy for him. Moving forward, though, I still think Devin Singletary is kind of flex value. I know that he's had, obviously, 2 really bad games, I shouldn't say bad games, but 2 disappointing games against really good matchups the past couple weeks. Obviously, this week, not a great matchup against Denver, but does come through through for you, so I think he kind of moves into that flex territory. John Brown, I think, is easily in your lineup every week, but what about Beasley? Has Beasley, who's had a couple good performances and a couple bad, then seems to be on that run of good performances again, has he moved into your flex spot moving forward, or is he one of those guys that kind of falls into the play the matchups with him?
Yeah, I think he benefited from a good matchup. They tend to teams tend to throw away from Denver's safeties and Chris Harris, and Harris was on Brown. If you were watching that touchdown catch that Brown made, you could see Harris right behind him. And that was actually live time. They, for some reason, ruled that incomplete, which I could never figure out why they thought it was incomplete.
Yeah.
But as soon as they did the replay, you could see there was a touchdown. And I think that benefited Beasley quite a bit. He was playing against DeVante Harris, the other corner for Denver, and just couldn't keep up with him.
All right, next up, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cincinnati Bengals. That was, I did not watch, I'm not even going to lie, I did not watch any of this game. I did go back and watch the highlights, but I was not looking forward to this game to begin with. So we know Mason Rudolph got benched. We mentioned that already a little bit earlier. Duck Hodges is the QB of note here. Just goes 5 of 11, 118 yards and a touchdown to come in at QB 22 with 8.8 points. Benny Snell gets most of the carries here. RB 16, 10.8 points, 98 yards on 21 carries. Does get you 1 catch on 5 yards. Really interesting that Jalen Samuels didn't get any play at all here. Wasn't injured as far as I know. He was supposed to be out there and doing stuff, just really did not get any run. 3 catches for 26 yards, 6 yards on 2 carries, comes in at RB 33 with 4.7 points. They actually relied more on their undrafted rookie Kareth White to be right there with Benny Snell or not with him on carries. He only had 6, but was the next best on the list after Benny Snell with 6 carries. James Washington, 3 catches, 98 yards, and 1 touchdown to come in at wide receiver 12 with 17.3 points. Deon Cain of the Indianapolis Colts, or recently of the Indianapolis Colts, 1 catch for 35 yards. Deontay Johnson was back in this one, 29 yards on 3 catches. We know Juju was out. Don't know if he will be back next week. I would not be surprised if he doesn't sit the rest of the year. Maybe comes back against Cleveland, but I think if they lose, that kind of eliminates them from the playoff race. I would imagine at that point you leave Connor and Juju out the rest of the season, let them heal up and get ready for next year when you got Big Ben coming back. Speaking of Cleveland, we mentioned it earlier. Everybody's looking forward to this matchup after what we saw a couple weeks ago on Thursday Night Football. Rudolph, do you think that he should be benched? And if you do, you think Duck Hodges should come in and play against Cleveland, what do you think this offense could look like with Hodges going up against a Cleveland Browns defense that is missing their best player as well in Myles Garrett?
Yeah, I mean, I just think Rudolph hasn't really looked consistent or looked very good most of this season, so it makes sense to me that Pittsburgh, they're kind of in that ball of teams at 6-5 or 5-6, and they were trying to save their season. Even in that game where they beat the Bengals earlier in the season, it was mostly about the power running of Connor and Samuels, which is why I was a little surprised that we didn't see anything from Samuels, because he had seemed to eat the Bengals alive last time. I feel like there's got to be more to that story. Either he did something in practice or it was more injured than they were letting on. The Steelers kind of a mess. They're just a total mess offensively. They're really relying on their defense to keep them in it and to make plays. I think that's going to be the case for much of the rest of the season. I think even if they make it into the playoffs, they're a really uninspiring playoff team. For as much as I like what Minkah Fitzpatrick has done and what some of that defense has done, their offense is just they're almost as unwatchable as they're almost one of the most unwatchable teams offensively. And for fantasy, I honestly, even if those guys come back, I don't know how you feel good about anyone in this game. Again, this Steelers Browns game, I think could be pretty physical and could be pretty brutal watch. I mean, that's the old AFC North. That's been kind of the mantra before of some of these division rivals. So Connor is iffy. They're hoping to get Juju Smith-Schuster back. Duck Hodges looks like he at least is trying to throw more vertically, which resulted in a good one for Washington. But, it's hard to have a lot of confidence in what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if Juju comes back, he's a dart throw at best, at a flex option. I do think Duck Hodges, in my opinion, gives him the better chance to put up fantasy points in that game, but I don't know if he does it. Again, he'll likely be matched up against Denzel Ward, who, for the most part, since coming back from injury outside that first game, has actually done a really good job of locking down top wide receivers. So I would not necessarily trust Juju moving forward. I agree with you. It's going to be, if Pittsburgh makes the playoffs, I think that Mike Tomlin should be coach of the year. No doubt about it with what he has done with this team, because it's just been ridiculous. And on the Jalen Samuels thing, I'm with you. The funny thing is we probably won't find out if it was anything that had to deal with off the field or practice stuff, because, as we have found out this past year, Antonio Brown was doing a whole lot more stuff behind the scenes than we ever realized, and they did a really good job of keeping that quiet. So I imagine Tomlin and them will find a very good, or do a good job of keeping whatever was wrong with Jalen Samuels, if it wasn't injury related, quiet, and we won't know about it. On the Bengals side, Ryan Finley, 12 of 26, 192, and 1 touchdown. Comes in at QB 17 with 12.5 points. Joe Mixon, 18 carries on 79 yards, but doesn't get anything in the passing game, which was a little confusing to me, especially with as good as he had looked lately in the passing game. And then Tyler Boyd, wide receiver 9 with 17.6 points, 101 yards, and a touchdown on 5 catches. Great touchdown catch, by the way. I did see that, over Joe Hayden, who's still probably a top 15-ish cornerback in the league. The way he kind of cut in front of him and then jumped up in the air and used his body to block Hayden was a great play. For me, moving forward, though, the Bengals, I think the only player I'm trusting is Tyler Boyd. Mixon has definitely looked better. You're probably playing him based on draft capital, but I don't know if you can trust him. What do you think about the Bengals and this just really, in all honesty, horrible offense moving forward?
Well, the Bengals did make an interesting announcement today that Andy Dalton has been restored as the starter.
Interesting.
Which I think tells you that they're definitely drafting a quarterback.
Yes.
They're playing the Jets this week at home, so not a terrible matchup. With Andy Dalton back in, I'm a lot more interested in Boyd and maybe Alex Erickson, maybe Tate if he plays. But again, it's a tough part of the schedule, so it's not a terrible matchup. I would figure that their passing offense will look a little better with Dalton. Yeah. Finley is just really bad.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. Just really bad. There's also some speculation now that A.J. Green's going to be reactivated. But maybe that's part of why they're going back to Andy Dalton. A.J. Green suddenly feels like his ankle is better now that he sees his friend, the Red Rifle, out there.
It might be some of them just trying to do everything they can to get a win too, so I want to ask you about that. But
why should they be trying to win?
Well, because here's the one thing we can say. They have firmly locked up the number 1 pick now with Washington's win this weekend and Miami. Miami sits at 2 wins and the Washington is at 2 now or 3? I can't remember how many wins Washington has. We'll get to them. Okay, so the whole point, I think, is you don't want to go 0-16 because that is a very bad stigma. As a team, as someone who has watched their team go 0-16, it is not a great feeling. So I think maybe they're trying to go out there and get a win. I don't see it against the Patriots. Maybe against the Browns. They've always, even when the Browns suck, those two have always played really close contests and almost always shootouts as well. But I would say their best chance of getting a win is either going to be this week against the Jets or in 3 weeks against the Dolphins. I really feel like if they get that one win, maybe they go back to Finley because I honestly think that looking at it from, especially the Bengals, they're one of the, original teams here. I just feel like they don't want to go 0-16. So in all honesty, I think if they would have gone to Andy Dalton in the game yesterday, they probably could have beaten the Steelers and gotten their win right then and there.
I don't know that you can go back to Finley after putting him in and taking him back out. I think that pretty well answers the question about whether they see him as a long-term. If you thought he was your long-term guy, you couldn't do what you're doing, even if you wanted to get a win.
Yeah.
I don't know that you can go back because nothing about those starts would have given him any confidence, and the fact that he's now been yanked again and had Dalton put back is not going to help his confidence, especially if A.J. Green suddenly heals himself. I think that's going to be a big blow to that kid. So, maybe they are trying to win. I think their pass offense pieces are a lot more interesting during a crucial week with Dalton and a Jets matchup than they might have been with Finley staying in. And you're probably right about Mixon. It was weird yesterday to see Gio Bernard seem to be the passing down back again. I thought he had gone into the witness relocation program, but apparently he's done testifying and he's back. And that just hurts Mixon all the more because they're not a good rush offense.
No, not at all. Yeah, what you were saying about Finley, I'm completely with you on. I feel like he would have had to be, absolutely almost what Gardner Minshew did for Jacksonville for them to kind of move off the QB plan. I feel like it's an interesting discussion, and I'm interested to have this discussion with people in the offseason on what they would do, because I don't know if you watch a lot of college football, but what Chase Young has been doing at Ohio State has firmly supplanted him as the number one prospect, I think, overall in college football. But I think if the Bengals get the number one pick, they're going Joe Burrow no matter what. I think they're going to go quarterback, as you were saying, even with Chase Young there on the board, and get Burrow as their franchise QB moving forward, especially what we've seen out of Finley. These past couple games, for him, he has just not looked good. I think Bengals have really kind of, with moving back to Andy Dalton speaks everything to what you were just saying. They're definitely going QB, and I think it's going to be Burrow with that number one pick in the 2020 draft.
I think it's similar to what we saw with Miami. They took a chance on Rosen in the offseason to see if they had something. They started with Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's clearly not the long-term answer. Yeah. They put Rosen in. They saw all they needed to see. They went back to Fitzpatrick just to make games more interesting, and I think that means, they're a top pick quarterback as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's one of the things I was just talking with someone on Twitter about earlier before we jumped on the podcast was how much I'm looking forward to the talk this year, because the quarterbacks here, especially with Tua getting hurt, and then Justin Herbert, who's a guy that I've been big on out of Oregon, has really kind of struggled this year, is really kind of firmly put Joe Burrow as the number one quarterback and really the only guy that a lot of people are sold on. Yet he's only had one good year of production as well, so that is a little bit of a red flag for him. So,
Haskins.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, you got exactly what you got. The one thing I will say, the difference with those are, well, no, because Joe Burrow was actually a highly recruited high school quarterback as well. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I can't wait to dive into that in the off season, but I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We still got a decent amount of the NFL season here to go, especially for fantasy playoffs, where we're jumping into the meat of it here in just a little bit. Let's see here. Raiders and Jets. The Raiders, everybody was talking about this being a trap game for them. With the Chiefs coming up next week, they were in the second wild card spot firmly coming into this week. They needed to get a win here. Fell flat on their faces against the Jets. 3-35. Derek Carr, QB 26 with 5.2 points in this one. 15-27, 127 yards, 1 interception. Josh Jacobs struggles mightily in this one as well. Just 34 yards on 10 carries. Jalen Richard gets you the most points, although most of that coming in the receiving game. 47 yards on 6 catches, just 4 yards rushing on 2 carries. Richard, RB23 with 8.1 points. Hunter Renfrow was the best wide receiver on the day, 31 yards on 3 catches. Came out earlier today that he has a punctured lung and broken ribs due to a hit that he took in that one, but does come in at wide receiver 51 with 4.6 points. And Darren Waller, tight end 13 with 5.6 points, 41 yards on 3 catches. With the Raiders struggling as bad as they did in this one, Carr was horrible, Williams was horrible, Waller was just okay. Obviously, Jacobs really bad. Are you trusting any of these guys moving forward into Week 13 if it's a must-win matchup for you?
Well, the Chiefs' defense has struggled a little bit, so they got that going for them. So probably Jacobs is still going out there, and Waller's in a group of tight ends that you may or may not play depending on your options. But I thought this was going to be a tough game. I actually had picked the Jets to win in this one. I didn't think they'd blow them out, but I thought the Jets would win. The Raiders are a young team. They are not a good road team. They are not a good come-from-behind team. All those things are going to not work in their favor when they are playing the Chiefs in Arrowhead.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like unfortunately this might be the end of the line for the Raiders this year, but still I think if you're a Raiders fan, you have to be encouraged what you've seen out of them. I feel like they clearly are just a couple pieces away from being a legitimate playoff contender. And what we've seen this year, what John Gruden has really meant to this team, I think that the Raiders, you've got a bright looking future, but I agree with you. I think especially going into Arrowhead this weekend, likely going to be a loss is really going to kind of end any chance they have of making the playoffs. On the Jets side, Sam Darnold, QB2 with 28.2 points in this one. A big bounce back game, although kind of expected with as bad as the Raiders secondary has been this year. Sam Darnold goes 20-29, 315 yards and 2 touchdowns. Le'Veon Bell, 49 yards on 12 carries, 59 yards on 5 catches to come in at RB10 with 13.3 points. Robbie Anderson finally comes out and plays as one of the best wide receivers in the game. 86 yards and a touchdown on 4 catches to come in at wide receiver 13 with 16.6 points. And Ryan Griffin just continues to be a top tight end, mostly due to all of the touchdowns that he has been catching here. Did get a contract extension as well this weekend. 13 yards, 3 catches and a touchdown. Tight end 7 with 8.8 points. Again, I'm going to keep saying it, continuing on the trend. Week 13, must-win matchup. Obviously, you're putting Bell out there. I honestly think Griffin has moved into that territory. I would almost throw him above the Doyle category and with that Cook category with the amount of touchdowns he's been catching. So for me, Griffin's right there. But what about you? Griffin, Anderson, Darnold even? Are you trusting these guys in a pivotal Week 13 matchup?
Yeah, they get the Bengals this week and then the Dolphins next week. So you're still riding, I think, the Jets train for a couple weeks. They seem like they're putting it together. You would question more that Week 15 matchup when they're going to face the Ravens. You know, you maybe cool your heels a little bit on them, but you know, none of them are you putting out there thinking you're going to have huge numbers, but I think Darnold is a decent option in Superflex and 2 QB leagues. With those 2 matchups. Bell is getting volume, not what we expected, but he's still probably an RB2. The real question is the receivers. I agree with you on Ryan Griffin, especially with no competition there, getting the contract extension. They really seem to have something going there. Robbie Anderson, 2 touchdowns in 2 consecutive weeks, 4 for 86 this week, really great, but he had been pretty much doing nothing up until that point. And even last week, he caught a 6-yard touchdown, but that was his only target.
Yeah.
It had seemed to be flowing through Crowder, and then all of a sudden now Crowder's kind of the odd man out. Demaryius Thomas not really doing anything. They hit a huge play to Braxton Berrios. I still think for the crucial part of the season we're in, their receivers are probably too shaky of a bet.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why I say for me, Bell and Griffin are the only 2 guys. Darnold, maybe. I'm kind of with you. Again, as you just mentioned, going up against the Bengals and then the Dolphins, depending on what else you're playing at QB, Darnold may not be a bad play because he has definitely looked a lot better here in the back half of the season. Crazy to think what the Jets might be looking like right now had Sam Darnold not gotten mono, because I do feel like this team has just obviously looked a lot better here the past couple weeks. Had he maybe been able to get out some of the kinks we saw once he first came back, out earlier in the season, the Jets might actually be a playoff contender. I know Sam Darnold says they are. I personally think that they are out of it. Next up, 2 teams that I guess in a way, are still vying for playoff contention in the NFC. Seattle at 9-2 and Philly losing here 17-9, falling to 5-6. Russell Wilson struggles in this one, I think kind of dropping his MVP candidacy a little bit. 13-25, 200 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Does get 15 yards on the ground and coming at QB 18 with 12.5 points. Rashard Penny has a huge game today, likely on most of everybody's benches. 129 yards, 14 carries, and 1 touchdown. 2 come in at running back 6 with 18.9 points. Chris Carson, RB 28 with 6.7 points. Just 26 yards on 8 carries, added 31 yards on 4 catches. Tyler Lockett, just 1 catch on 38 yards. Not that surprising. He dealt with a pretty serious leg injury beforehand. Had to stay in the hospital beforehand, came back. Obviously was practicing him, and due to his upside, you had to play him. But I think this is kind of one of those things you can just shake off for him. DK Metcalf, 35 yards, 3 catches in this one. 2 come in at wide receiver 48 with 5 points. Lockett was wide receiver 53 with 4.3 points. You had, I'm not gonna lie, a guy I had never even heard of, Malik Turner, that came through with a big catch, just 1 catch, his 33-yard touchdown catch from Chris Carson's not the quarterback. Russell Wilson. Josh Gordon, the guy a lot of people had high
that
hopes
one
for.
came on the trick play, too. Turner's touchdown was on a flea flicker.
Gotcha. Okay, maybe that's why I was thinking Chris Carson. Josh Gordon, though, 1 catch for 10 yards, so we were hoping for him, not quite coming through. What do we do with Chris Carson and Rashad Penny here moving forward? We've seen Chris Carson has really struggled with fumbles this year. Just the one fumble, didn't lose it, but still one fumble again this week. Really, they seem to lean on Rashad Penny. Are we starting to think that this is the shift again? Because we did see this at the back end of last year as well. They really started to lean on Rashad Penny at the end of last year, moving closer to the playoffs. Do you think that's what they're doing here? Maybe just a bad game for Carson? Are you worried about Carson moving forward?
I think just a bad game for Carson. And, of course, the Eagles have a pretty decent rush defense. That's what they're kind of known for. So you would have expected all the runners to struggle. I think, Penny, a lot of his damage comes on a 58-yard touchdown where he kind of broke free and did that. Aside from that, he had, about 58, 60 yards on 13 carries. I think they seem to have been committed to Carson for most of the year. It seems weird to think that they would just completely go away from him. I'd need more evidence than this.
Gotcha.
Seattle, you have to remember too, they beat the 49ers when they played the first time. They have one more game together.
Yep.
They are one game behind the 49ers. If they remain in that position and they win again, all of a sudden the Seahawks go from a dangerous 5th seed to the number 1 seed. This is kind of the back and forth that we saw last year in the AFC West with the Chiefs and the Chargers. People forget that the Chargers were 12-4, tied for the best record in the AFC, and it was simply those divisional games with Kansas City that knocked them down into a wild card spot. So, you say you think it hurt Russell Wilson's MVP candidacy. I think everything he's done this year, including going on the road and winning in Philly, which is a tough place to win. The Seahawks are 6-0 on the road this year. That is simply fantastic.
That is true. A guy that I had high hopes on that possibly being the MVP this year, and Carson Wentz did not have a great day here. 33 of 45, 256 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. 2 come in at QB 15 with 14.9 points. Miles Sanders, RB 18 with 10.10 points. 12 carries, 63 yards. In this one, we obviously saw a little bit of Jay Ajayi as well. Sanders did add 23 yards on 3 catches. Ajayi did get 6 carries for 16 yards. J-Jaw, their rookie wide receiver out of Stanford, wide receiver 45 with 5.3 points, 43 yards on 2 catches. Zach Ertz is the big leader on the day here, finishes as tight end 2 with 21.1 points, 1 touchdown, 12 catches, 91 yards. Dallas Goedert also gets 32 yards on 7 catches as well. We've seen that these Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver core is just completely beat up. We don't know for sure when Alshon Jeffrey will be back. We saw a lot of Greg Ward Jr. out there, obviously J-Jaw as well. Moving forward, Philly. They obviously are still technically in the playoff race and honestly have a very easy schedule going forward. Dolphins, Giants, Redskins, then the Cowboys, Giants again. So I do think if they can win the next 3, they will be in playoff contention. That Cowboys game could be pivotal as the Cowboys have already beaten them once this year. Who on the Eagles are you trusting? Because I feel like with as beat up as this team is, Miles Sanders may be a flex. Obviously, Zach Ertz is as your tight end. I honestly feel like Goddard can be played as a tight end every single week as well.
Yeah, Ertz or Goddard at tight end. Depending on your options, you might consider Wentz at quarterback. Sanders, I don't know. It really is going to depend. If Jordan Howard comes back, he seems to be the guy that's getting like the ground and pound work. I thought it was really a chance the last couple of weeks for Sanders to maybe show what he could do, and we haven't seen it. Same thing with J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. If ever there was a week where you thought he might emerge as a receiver this year, it should have been this week. They had nothing. D-Jax is on IR. Jeffrey and Aguilar got ruled out. And we aren't seeing it. The Eagles are so banged up. I still think week 16 against Dallas is going to decide the NFC East. The NFC East is going to produce one playoff team. It's either at this point going to be the Cowboys or the Eagles. I think that game is really going to decide it. But Philly, I like Philly, but they've been beat up all year and they just have so many injuries that they aren't able to hang with these teams.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to get some of these guys back. If Alshon comes back, if Howard comes back, they've got a better shot. But, I mean, the Cowboys, I'm with you. I think that's going to be it because they have 3 very losable matchups moving forward. Obviously, we talked a little bit about it earlier. They got the Bills this week on Thursday. Then they have the Bears the next Thursday after that. And then the Rams. And all 3 of those teams, although the Bears probably the least in the race, sitting at 5-6. Technically, if they win out the next couple games, could jump back into the race, but the Rams are still technically in it at 6-4. Bills are definitely a top wild card spot right now. So, gonna be an interesting next couple weeks. Again, Eagles really soft schedule, Cowboys tough schedule. That Week 16 matchup could be pivotal for both of those teams. The last game that we are going to talk about today, the Detroit Lions losing to the Washington Redskins 16-19. On the Lions side, Jeff Driscoll, 20 of 33, 207 yards, 1 touchdown, and 3 interceptions to come in at QB 13 with 15.6 points. Did add 63 yards on the ground. Bo Scarborough continues to be the lead running back here, 98 yards on 18 carries. Does nothing, though, in the receiving game. Does come in at RB21 with 8.8 points. Kenny Galladay, 61 yards, 4 catches to come in at wide receiver 32 with 8.1 points. And Marvin Jones, wide receiver 37 with 7.1 points. 46 yards on 5 catches. For me on the Lions side here, we don't know what's going to happen with Matt Stafford. I think that's going to be the biggest thing here moving forward. We know he's got the broken bones in his back. They have not necessarily said that he's going to be out for the rest of the season. There's been talk of that, but they've not made that decision yet. Regardless, if Driscoll or Stafford is out there, I take it back. If Stafford is out there, I feel good with Kenny Galladay and Marvin Jones. If it's Jeff Driscoll, I kind of just believe in Kenny Galladay. That's just my opinion. What is your take on the Lions guys, with really, I guess, the main guys being Scarborough, Galladay, and Jones moving forward for fantasy?
Yeah, Scarborough was okay, but not great. We've seen Detroit struggle running the ball all season. He also lost a fumble, so, kind of limits his upside. Driscoll is kind of what he is. The matchup on Thanksgiving Day at home, but it's against the Bears, so it's not a great matchup. I think at this point in time, Stafford's likely to just get 3-7-1. It's a lost season for the Lions. I love Kenny Galladay's talent. What bothers me is he only had 4 targets yesterday. He caught all of them and helped to make his day. Marvin Jones got 11 targets, has consistently gotten many more targets from Driscoll than Galladay. So I think they're probably still both in play, but you're lowering expectations a little bit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think, for me, and then the only reason I think Kenny Galladay, for me, especially if Driscoll's out there, is the only one that I would trust, is just because he is so talented. That he's one of those players that he can go up and get a touchdown or take something to the house. So I'm with you on that, though. I'm not that big on Scarborough. Marvin Jones does scare me. Kenny Galladay's the guy for me. On the skin side here, so Dwayne Haskins gets his first win as an NFL quarterback. Doesn't take the victory formation. Everybody talking about the whole selfie gate thing. I don't think that's that big of an issue, but everybody is talking about it. Does go 13-29, 156, no touchdowns, 1 interception. QB 23 with 8 points. Darius Geis, 32 yards on 10 carries. Does add 6 yards on 1 catch. To come in at RB 35 with 4.3 points. Adrian Peterson, RB 31 with 5.4 points, also gets 10 carries, but just 27 yards, does get 1 catch for 22 yards. Terry McLaurin is back. At least this week. A lot of people have kind of been writing him off with as bad as he had looked with Dwayne Haskins. Does get targeted 12 times, doubles up the next best player, who was Kelvin Harmon, another rookie that came out of NC State last year that I was high on. I think has a lot of upside moving forward. But McLaurin, 72 yards on 5 catches. Wide receiver 26 with 9.7 points. We had already talked about it before with guys. He's kind of in Dynasty, a guy that you're hoping looks good throughout the rest of the season, but you're not necessarily trusting. But what about McLaurin? I feel like he's probably the only fantasy viable player on this offense. Are you trusting him with what we saw out of him and Haskins against a decent Detroit secondary?
Yeah, I think he's a wide receiver 3, but definitely in the conversation for playing. He's the only Redskin that I would consider at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, I almost want to say it's kind of the matchups for me with him. I would say if you I'm trying to think of.
They're at the Panthers next week, so that's not great. Then at the Packers, home for the Eagles, home for the Giants. So, maybe if you make it to week 16, you're feeling a little better about things. But they don't exactly have a great schedule because Panthers and Packers have decent defenses, and those are both going to be road games, and they will be coming for Haskins. I have not seen a lot of growth from him, and I think that's an issue. They also have a terrible offensive line.
Yes, that is true. And Harmon, NC State, I think that's what I just said. I can't remember, but just wanted to get that correct. So that right there will do it for us today. We will be back tomorrow. We will break down the Jags and Titans, which was not a great game. Really, neither was the Cowboys Patriots. And then the really all three of the games that we're going to talk about at the moment were pretty crappy games, and the Packers 49ers as well. So hoping the Rams Ravens is a good one tonight. And then we will preview all of the Thanksgiving games as well, as we usually do our podcast on Thursdays due to it being Thanksgiving. We are going to take that off. So me and Matt will be back tomorrow and preview those games as well. Matt, have yourself a great day. Look forward to talking to you tomorrow, and enjoy the Monday Night Football game tonight between the Ravens and the Rams.
Yeah, and I think I can confidently say we're both on the same page for tonight. Go Rams.
Yes, absolutely. Go Rams. Beat the Ravens' ass. I shouldn't say anything bad. I don't want Lamar Jackson to get hurt. Dude, the kid is phenomenal, but I do hope they lose. I do hope they lose badly. I will put it that way.
Prepare for glory!
I don't know if you got your popcorn ready. Do you got your popcorn ready?
I came out the womb, I was ready.
And he's hit the end zone for an unbelievable touchdown.
I would be honored if you played football for this team.
Throw it up above his head. They can't jump with me. Golly.
Oh, they tackle him at the 40-yard line.
Who can make a play? I can. Who can make a play? I can.
As a small business owner, you deserve more. More confidence, more connectivity, more of the tools that help your business thrive. And at Cox Business, you can expect more from us. We don't just have sales reps. We have perfect plan identifiers. People who will work with you to make sure your business gets everything it needs and nothing that it doesn't. Your business deserves more, and that's why you can expect more from Cox Business. Call 800-526-8572 to switch today. As a small business owner, you deserve more. More confidence, more connectivity, more of the tools that help your business thrive. And at Cox Business, you can expect more from us. We don't just have sales reps. We have perfect plan identifiers. People who will work with you to make sure your business gets everything it needs and nothing that it doesn't. Your business deserves more, and that's why you can expect more from Cox Business. Call 800-526-8572 to switch today.